So all a plot to see if you can make Michael cry. And everything you said, Anne, was true, except it hasn't been 40 years. It's been like 12, I think. Right. Well, I'm going to talk about empire because the empire is happening right now and doing itself on us. Can you hear me all right? Yeah? It just doesn't have enough pickup. I have to lean. That's what the sound engineers, they go, testing, testing. Now, who gives a lecture like this? Can you read your notes? You know what I mean? So, what? You can't lift it up, sweetheart. No, whenever I go someplace, they say, "Do you need a PowerPoint? You need slides?" I said, "No. All I need is to be left alone while I'm talking."
In a couple of books. How's that?
Oh, that's a help. Thanks a lot, Mike. No, I always say all I need is a good sound system and some water, and sometimes I get the water, you know. But not this time. I didn't get any. Well, let me say something about empire because it's right on our necks. It's happening to us. It's destroying people's lives in many parts of the world. I mean, to have your life shattered, to have everything, your community, your profession, your home, your family, by drones that are coming in and killing you for humanitarian reasons is very hard and very horrible, and we live in the belly of that monster. The U.S. has an empire as never before seen in human history. There has never been an empire of this scope and this power. Over 700 military bases and troops in about 80 or 90 countries. That's extraordinary. The U.S. spends more on military than all other nations combined. You know, there's the Republican resistance to a stimulus package, which guaranteed no relief from the recession. But we have a stimulus package every year. We've been having it since 1947, 46. And that's the military budget. That's the military allocation. It's $780 million a year, and it's about all that the federal government does in the way of creating jobs, it seems. It's an empire without colonies, of course, as you know, because that day is gone. Colonel Blimp's day is gone. You don't have to bring your troops, plant your flag, annex the country. You let the country have itself, and you just take what you want out of it. De Tocqueville had a great quote in Democracy of the Theatre, and I can't remember it, but look it up sometime. That's called preparation. It was something like how he says the merchant doesn't really want power. He just wants the money that he can get out of the situation. He doesn't want to have to take care of the whole overhead. I forget what it was. But let me tell you my statement. It's called neo-colonialism and neo-imperialism. And neo-colonialism means you don't send Colonel Blimp down. You don't occupy and own the country the way the Brits did with India for over 120 years or more. What am I saying? 160 years or so. It's more like what the Americans did in Cuba. That was one of the earliest, not the earliest, but one of the earliest of neocolonialism. We went to the Cubans in 1902 and we said, U.S. leaders said, you know, we stole you from the Spaniards fair and square, but it doesn't look good. You know, we're a republic and we can't have colonies and that sort of thing. So we're going to give you your independence. You're going to have your own flag. It's going to be red, white, and blue, and you get only one star on it because you're just a little island. You know, one star is enough for you. And you get your own. You're going to get your own currency. You're going to have Jose Marti on the currency. You don't have to have George Washington. We're flex with this. So, and you got your own presidente, and you're going to have your own constitution. In fact, here it is, because our Spanish isn't that good. Check it up. and all we will have in return for all of this generosity, all this care, and all this expense we're going through, all we'll have in return is we'll control your sugar, only control your sugar industry, your tobacco industry, your nickel refineries, your mines, your tourist industry, and all your relations with third countries, other countries. So you're free, you're independent now. So as you can see, the goal is not glory of empire, the goal is the gold of empire. With the third world countries having nominal independence, but today the giant transnational corporations control most of the land, labor, resources, and markets of many of these countries. Great profits for transnational corporate investors, great impoverishment for the people of these countries, and great blood spilling. One of the things that empires do, I discovered, and it's never talked about that much, you know, they kill enormous numbers of people. They just slaughter and kill. Right now, I mean, the number of people killed in Iraq, the number of people killed in Libya by these drones and by these mercenary units that have come in these Islamic militant and Al-Qaeda groups that are CIA funded, a la early Afghanistan. The killings that have gone on everywhere. I mean, the 78 days of bombing in Yugoslavia, I remember going there a week after the bombings had stopped and horrified by what I saw. Thank you. So they kill a lot of people. I mean, the taking of the North American continent killed hundreds of thousands of people here. Indigenous peoples. Now, usually you hear the opposite. You hear that capitalism, I was mentioning these transnational corporations investing and coming in. Capitalism brings prosperity. I mean, we're taught that, right, since pretty early. You're told that all the time. Now, I want to demonstrate the contrary. I want to prove to you that your lifetime of propaganda that you got on that point is wrong. But you have to give me 15, 20 seconds to do it, okay? Okay. Here's how I'll do it. One, most of the world is capitalist, and most of the world is poor, not prosperous. Two, in those parts of the world where capitalist investment has little or no regulation imposed on it, the populations are poorest. The investors enjoy the highest rate of return, the highest margin in those places. Three, the more free trade and free market the world becomes, the poorer it becomes. The number of people living in poverty today is growing at a faster rate than the world's population. That means poverty is spreading. So capitalism is not spreading prosperity. The more capitalist a country becomes, the poorer it is. Consider capitalist Indonesia. Consider capitalist Guatemala, capitalist Mexico, capitalist Nigeria, capitalist India. Now, in India's case, in a few of those cases, there's also an immense substratum of feudalism involved too. But these feudalists are hand in glove with the capitalists. And the same within the United States. The more free trade, the more free markets, the more income inequality, the more economic hardship for the 99%, and the more wealth for the 1%. Well, what is this U.S. global empire? Well, besides being a network of all these military bases all over the world, besides having these massive aircraft carrier, atomically armed fleets that make port on every continent in the world and floating all over that, they also have a global network of military and security forces in all these countries. I mean, made up of the troops in these countries, and paramilitary forces and police all over the globe. All of them financed, equipped, advised, trained by the U.S. Pentagon, the CIA, and related agencies. In Africa, for instance, 50 nations over time, not all at the same time, but over time, 50 nations have received extensive military aid from the United States over these last decades. 50. There's only 53 countries in Africa, so 50 out of 53. But I have to part company with people like Chalmers Johnson, who thinks this empire is just there for power, that these people just seek power for power's sake. Not at all. They're very rational. They're very, very rational. They have a very keen understanding of their own interests. The empire is not just motivated by power for power's sake. Power is an instrument of empire, not the end all. The goal is to expropriate the wealth of the world. The second goal, the subsidiary goal, is to make the world safe for the expropriators. So there may be times when you have to take out a nation, not because the nation has oil that you want, not because they're threatening anything. Oh, no, that's it. Because they can somehow be a threat in some way, you see. I mean, why did the United States invade Grenada? You remember Ronald Reagan? His greatest victory, Grenada. 102,000 people. But that wasn't stupid. That wasn't excessive. That wasn't fear of the Soviets. That's what he told you. That, oh, there are shipping lines, and the Soviets might chokehold these shipping lines right from Grenada into the Caribbean, and they're very strategic. Suddenly, Grenada was the most strategic place in the whole globe, you see. No, they went into Grenada to serve notice to every other country in the Caribbean that if you have a revolutionary movement like this, if you start building communal farms, if you start giving out free education and free medical care, if you kick out our companies and corporations or take them over, this is what's going to happen to you. We'll come right down on your neck like we came down on the Grenadans. It's the threat of the good example. And that's something that is not to be tolerated. So there, the subsidiary goal, to make the world safe for the expropriators. Ronald Reagan was right when he said, it's not nutmeg. It wasn't that our Grenada cut off our nutmeg supply, bringing this country to its knees. How can I eat my cinnamon bun? I need... We can get perfectly good nutmeg from Africa, every bit as good as from Grenada. So it wasn't that. It's not just resource acquisition all the time. It was to make sure that no nation, no movement, no leader shall pursue an alternative way of using the land, the labor, the natural resources, the markets, and the capital of the country. And that's what that was all about. And today in Grenada, those communal farms have been converted back to golf courses. Today, unemployment in Grenada is up about 20%, 25% or more. And today, the tourist industry is back, and the tourist companies and the big hotels are back, while the people live in shacks and such. So it's the same thing they've been doing in Central America and many other places. The U.S. rulers have attacked many countries in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, the Far East, and Central Asia now. Big in Central Asia now, lately, right? By our Nobel Peace Prize winner. What's his name, the guy in the White House? I block on it. The one who's always talking about folks. Us folks. Folks are going to want to get that folksy way he talks. I puke in the hands. They don't, and who have they attacked? They attacked only those that have attempted reformist or revolutionary new kinds of approaches. Only those who have tried to get out from under the New World Order. Only those who have tried to get out of the order of transnational corporate capitalism. They're attacked with trade wars, sanctions, financial strangulation, debt traps, invasions, death squads, subversion, all sorts of things like that. Sometimes surrogate invasion, use some other country to knock off this country, and the one who's doing it gets paid off. Like, for instance, in Indonesia, knocking off East Timor, or something like that. The Indonesian government is a fascist, militarist government, which was put in there by the U.S. back totally, and at a huge massacre. Again, closing down all the libraries, all the clinics and everything that had built by Sukarno, and only one of his coalition government, one component was made up of the Indonesian Communist Party. Most of them were massacred, and their sin was building the libraries and clinics and better roads and better housing. All of that's gone now. Indonesia is a totally untrammeled, untouched free market system. And those who try to get out from under this transnational grip are called anti-American. They're called hostile to us. They're called a potential threat. People like Iran, like Venezuela, for instance. Chavez, he's still selling the oil, and he repeatedly asked for friendly relations. They've got nothing to lose by having friendly relations and not have the U.S. on their neck, but that's not what they end up getting. This process of expropriating, where the ruling interest in one country expropriates the land, labor, natural resources, wealth, capital of another country, that process is called imperialism. Imperialism is what empires do. And that's, if you want to know something about the literature, in 1995 I wrote a book called Against Empire, and it was about U.S. policy. And I had all sorts of people, not all sorts, 2 or 3, saying, "Oh, Parenti, you're going over, there you go, over the top again. Empire? We don't have an empire. You don't use the word empire." And it's true, you could never use the word empire for the U.S. There was the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire, the Soviet Empire, the most menacing, wickedest of all, ready to lurch at us and cut our throats open until they gave up and retired from the thing. But not America. You wouldn't call America an empire. So I was alone out there with that book, Against Empire. Actually, it's done pretty well. But this one is much updated, better book. What was I going to say about that? Oh, yeah. In the year 2000, 5 years after that book came out, all sorts of books started coming out about empire. Sorrows of Empire, The Follies of Empire, Empire at the Door, or whatever it is, Empire here. And they were all referring to the United States as empire. I said, that's amazing. They're actually calling America an empire. And I was puzzling over it. And then when I looked more closely at these books, I realized they were using the term in that other way I was just saying, just power for power's sake, and nothing about the political economy, nothing about capitalism. That word, that you say that word in a talk, and you risk not getting that journalist's job, not getting that tenure, not getting that whatever else. They were just saying we're an empire, just meaning empire was thought of in terms of dominion, that it's just have a reach. And remember those old movies about Rome you used to see? Empires, when I wrote my book, The Assassination of Julius Caesar, I actually immersed myself for almost 2 years as a classics, going into Roman stuff. It's a book about ancient Rome and about why Caesar was really assassinated. And what I discovered is the literature, the scholarly literature on empire is rather positive toward empire. It's positive toward these murderous, plundering, aggrandizing organizations. Empire is seen as a thing that goes out there and gives organization. A lot of squabbling tribes, and Rome comes along and builds roads and makes it orderly and makes it neat and all that. Most of the movies we see, remember those? Rome, Rome shall prevail, Rome, and you sit there and you go, yeah, yeah, not realizing Rome was a bunch of murderers, overlooking little things like that. I'm digressing here. Where was I about the process? Oh, and what was missing was imperialism in all these new books about empire. I mean, even conservatives, right-wingers, you'd see on the talk shows, they say, well, we're now an empire. We're the only superpower, and we've got an empire, and we've got to act like an empire. We've got responsibilities. And we got, as if this immense power gave them a certain entitlement to go beat up on other people in other countries and such. Well, as I say, imperialism is what empires do. Now, somebody say to you, you mean they go off and they go off and they put in these SAPs, structural adjustment programs, with the IMF coming in and saying, you've got a debt now, make them go into debt, and their trade falls off and their debt is worse than they anticipated, and you really give them a tough time, and it becomes an excuse to roll back their social wage and eliminate it, to make their people hungrier, to privatize things, hand over the stuff. Okay. Do you really think they do that? Would they do that in all these places? I said, they're doing it here. They're doing it. The plutocracy is doing that here, cutting back on our social programs, using debt as a bludgeon, as an excuse for not having to pursue such social programs and give yourself over to luxuries like housing and education and medical care. Yeah, that's exactly it. The same things that the empire does abroad, they do to themselves also. And recessions occur. Recessions, brothers and sisters, recessions occur, as Karl Marx said over 150 years or more ago. Recessions occur when workers aren't paid enough money to buy back the goods and services that they produce. If you keep cutting costs, laying off people, doing speed-ups, making 7 workers do the work now that 10 workers used to do, and you get it tighter and tighter, and you pay out less and less, and you produce more and more, who's going to buy all this stuff? Well, at first, first of all, they buy a lot of it. They buy their jet planes, and they buy their Rolls Royces and their jewelries and their works of art and this and that. The consumption by the 1% goes up dramatically, as is happening right now. And then they have a certain stratum that they need that's equipped and such, and they give them something, a tiny little professional adjunct class. And then what we did from the 1980s and such right up to 2007 was people were using their credit cards and using their mortgages, refinancing mortgages and such, and living off that. And what's happened is that's all pretty much gone now. The credit card debt has something like I forget, it went up 75% from 1997 to 2007. And Fred Magdoff, who was in the audience, telling me another great debtor class we have now, probably the greatest debtor class, are right among us, some of them standing in the back, and that's students. The students may now be, Fred, what was it, $80 billion?
It's $800 billion, approximately.
$800 billion, the student debt in America today. So that's what starts happening when you say, well, who's going to buy all this? Where's the demand going to come from? And don't forget, it's not human need. Capitalism does not respond to human need. You may need shoes, you may need medical care, you may need housing, but that doesn't interest me. It's when that need or want, if you want something, which you may need or you may not need it, but you may want it, if that want is coupled with buying power, with money, and that's what they never talk about need. They talk about demand, consumer demand. There's people who have money who are going to buy something, and that's the problem we have. So we're in this recession. But recessions are not such bad things, ladies and gentlemen, not for everyone. For the plutocracy, for the corporate elites who own most or much of this country, the recession is a great time to wipe out smaller competitors. You have big capital beating the stuff out of small capital, buying them up at bargain basement prices and the like, pushing them out in some way. Labor unions are tamed ever more, even more, and sometimes even broken. Labor itself, not the labor union, but your own human labor, is tamed even more. You work harder for less pay. You forget benefits. You have people now passing off on their vacations. If they go take their vacation, there's a good chance when they come back, the door will be locked for them. So they're working harder, longer. Sometimes they're working overtime. Now it's a question of people getting paid for overtime. In my day, overtime pay was time and a half. Remember that? So if you made $1 an hour, overtime pay was $1.50 an hour. Now there's a question of even paying people for overtime. So this recession, as they say, is a jobless recovery. It's massive hardship, but it's record profits also. And recessions also advance privatization. As state and local governments lose revenues, they sell off natural resources, they sell off public parks, they sell off public infrastructures, bridges, utilities, trains, bus lines, prisons, schools. They close other services. The city of Oakland, California, which you've seen in the news, Occupy Oakland recently, it really infuriated me. I live about 10 blocks from the Oakland border in South Berkeley, and it really infuriates me. You see these cops standing there when they get into their battle gear, their war gear, and they're standing there, and each one of these cops must have about, $3,000 to $5,000 worth of equipment on them. Bulletproof vest, the Darth Vader helmet, the taser, the mace gun, the percussion grenades. What the hell is a cop in a civil society doing with a percussion grenade? Well, go to your website. You can see him pulling the grenade when Scott Olson had been hit by the tear gas and people gathered around him. He was standing just as far away as I'm from you. Pull the grenade and toss it right in at the people. Can bust people's eardrums or hurt them in some other way. And so here are these guys. This is the Oakland cops who can't even answer a call. They resent it when their donuts and coffee time is taken and intruded upon them. These are the same cops who say, we don't have the budget anymore for crimes against property. It's only crimes against person that we're going to respond to. What a nice thing to announce, huh? To break in artists and such and all that. This is the same city that can't afford, but when it comes to the cops, wow, they got them out there. They get federal funds for that too. This is the same city of Oakland that's just closing 14 of its 18 libraries. I was raised in East Harlem in New York, Manhattan. It was called Italian Harlem in those days. It was an Italian working class neighborhood, blue collar neighborhood. That was my family. We were very poor. You got a problem with that? No, okay. So but I remember the library as being a kind of oasis because it was a pretty tough environment. And I remember that when I got tired of hanging around the pool room or the handball court or the street, I would get tired. I'd get bored sometimes. I'd go to the library. I'd walk up to 125th Street. I'd go to this library branch, and there were these books. And it wasn't that I had any great intellectuality campaign or something like that. It was that it was just that it was a window out to other places. It was like an opening, that longing for things yet to come, and to read about all sorts of odd things in history and science and whatever else. It was great. And you know, and that's the first thing I thought when they said Oakland closing 14 of their 18 libraries. I said, isn't that, yeah, that's the best thing to do for the kids of the city of Oakland. Close the library. For some of those kids, it'd probably be the only quiet place and the only place where they can gather themselves. So that's what privatization does. It impoverishes even the local governments, and that's what imperialism does. The empire feeds off the republic, and so the republic starves while the empire bloats and gets bigger and bigger and fatter and meaner. Talk among yourselves a minute while I get this. There was a talk by Robert Reich I heard. It was a very good talk he was making about policy in Washington and all that. And then he ruined the whole talk for me. He ruined it at the end he said, too bad there isn't anybody in Washington with at least half a brain to deal with this. And then the audience all laughed and all that. And I'm saying to myself, what's he talking about? He thinks he's being very stupid. So he thinks those people are stupid. He thinks they're handling this recession this way because they're stupid. They're just not as smart as we are. No, they're handling it this way because that's the way they want to do it. They want a jobless recovery. They're making record profits and wealth accumulation, more money than they know what to do with. Warren Buffett just started. I read this in the Wall Street Journal. Warren Buffett is buying up his own stock for Hawthorne. And the Wall Street Journal, amazing. I didn't know that the reporter could get away with saying this. I mean, stock is something you print up to get people's cash. And here he's using his cash to soak up this paper. And so the reporter said, this does prove that there are some businesses that have more money than they know what to do with, you know. And that's what's going on. They're doing well. They're not stupid. And so with foreign policy, it's not stupid. We constantly hear that. In the face of imperialism, I have I think a good solid half a page of adjectives that are used to describe U.S. foreign policy. I'll read only a few of them. Inept, reckless, misguided, overreaching, arrogant, deluded, aggrandizing, well-intentioned, but, you know, misled, but sucker, you know, confused. So you're just smarter than all of these presidents and administrations and all of these agencies. Is that it? They're just chronic. Aren't you stupid for not asking, how is it they're constantly so stupid, all these 10s and 20s and 30s of years? How is that? They keep doing these things, and you keep calling them stupid. And the liberal critic is never happier than when he can rock back on his heels and say, how stupid they are. How stupid. No, you're stupid when you think your enemies who are beating the hell out of the world and you and getting richer off our blood, sweat, and tears, you're stupid when you think they're stupid. Richard Cohen, columnist for the Washington Post for about 30 years now or more. Here's how you get to be a columnist and stay a columnist for the Washington Post. You write sentences like this. The Iraq War is not the product of oil avarice or CIA evil, and we didn't say it was those two simple things. I'm saying something else about containment, right? It's the product of a surfeit of altruism, a naive compulsion to do good. So there it is. That's what it is. And then he cites George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Paul Wolfowitz as examples of compulsive do-gooders who suffer from this surfeit of altruism and they just can't stop doing good here, you know. So don't, next time anybody says how stupid they are, you say, no, they're very smart. Why do you call the people who own the world stupid and who control everything, control the media, control the military and all that sort of thing? It's a very rational and consistent policy. The U.S. empire builders support, it's as simple as this, they support those dictators or democratically elected governments that follow the New World Order of free market capitalism. these U.S. empire builders oppose those dictators or democratic governments that seek an alternative to free market capitalism. It has nothing to do with humanitarian wars. It has nothing to do with democracy. They'll use democracy as a window dressing. They'll use it as a front, sure, but they'll destroy democracies. They'll put up showcase democracies and hold elections. Look, they're going to hold this. Never mind. No, I'm getting Liberia mixed up with Libya. I just made a mistake. And so, okay. So here, I'll give you the case right from the Arab Spring, so-called. Right here, two countries right next to each other. A dictator who ruled his country for 30 years without stint. I'm talking about Mubarak in Egypt. And another dictator in Libya who did horrible things like kick out the oil companies, oil corporations, take the oil earnings and use them to build schools, education, housing, medical care, and the like. Gaddafi, and who also ruled dictatorial, it's true. Well, what did they do with Mubarak? I'll tell you what they did. That Obama and his friend Hillary, right down to the last days, they were still defending Mubarak and saying nice things about him and saying, let's be patient and let's have some nice, gradual, gentle change. That's what they were doing. Right to the last day, until it became impossible and they couldn't support him anymore because nobody in Egypt was supporting him, not even his own military. It was like Reagan with Marcos in the Philippines, remember? He was saying, he's an all right guy, he's all right. And when finally they had to go find a new face because the people were against it, the clergy, the church was against it, and the military, the generals hated Marcos for all sorts of reasons about favoritism and corruption, in-house reasons, not because they had a new political economic agenda. So you just put in some new faces and you go for it. But with Gaddafi, they had him labeled as a wicked, evil man from a long time ago, and there they waged a humanitarian war where they bombed Libya's houses, utilities, ports, factories, farms, and the like. Gaddafi built that whole aquifer system, took that wonderful aquifer, that incredible resource of water, pure water from southern Libya, brought it north to all the people in the cities and farms. Most of the population is in the north, and he did it all without IMF. He refused to have the IMF meddling in there. Mubarak had the IMF all over him, messing up one thing after another, because the IMF ultimately looks after the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is the organized arm of finance capitalism in the world. So that's the difference. That was Gaddafi's real sins. Do you really think they went in because they were suddenly worried for humanitarian reasons that somebody was getting killed? People are getting killed and murdered and thrown into jail without trial, like right here in Guantanamo, come to think of it. But all over the world, do you think they suddenly just felt they had to do this about Libya? Was that it really? And they had to wage a humanitarian war while their allies was Saudi Arabia and countries of that ilk? Okay. Well, how did the empire builders get the American people to go along with this? I wrote a book called Super Patriotism. I said there were two things. One is the messianic appeal. We are God's answer to humankind, and we are here to help and deliver the lesser peoples, teach them democracy and all that stuff. There's that appeal, but the real thing that wins support is fear. Back in '91, the polls were showing Gulf War I, the first one with Bush Sr. The American population, despite all the propaganda and all the one-sided things that were thrown at it, it voted overwhelmingly against going in. Then they said, if Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, that term wasn't in vogue yet. They said, if Saddam Hussein has nuclear weapons, would you want us to go in? And he might use them. Then the percentages shifted. So that's all they started hitting. Saddam Hussein, worse than Hitler, a real danger. Any day he can attack. And when people are convinced suddenly that they are not, they and their children and family and whatever, are not safe, they will then step in line and salute the flag and follow it. And the flag is wrapped around the president who's ready to drop bombs and do that sort of thing. So that's what it's all about. And that's true. I gave you the example of Mubarak and Gaddafi. There's too many other variables there, you could say. Okay, what if I give you the example of one person, one man, and that's Saddam Hussein. When Saddam Hussein, his first gig was with the CIA, and that was to murder the prime minister of Iraq. He was a prime minister, democratically elected, a coalition government that had just kicked out the oil companies and was beginning to pursue a reformist policy in Iraq. Saddam Hussein shot him and didn't kill him. The CIA guy hustled him away into a safe house. And later on, with enough death squads, enough disruption, enough everything else, he took over the Ba'athist Party and took over the government. And Saddam Hussein murdered or drove into exile or underground every constitutionalist, every Democrat, every reformer, every communist, every socialist that was around in sight. And when he was killing people and murdering people in substantial numbers, when he was at his most murderous stage, he was Washington's poster boy. They loved him. They kissed him. He couldn't be seen. They'd come and travel to Baghdad and had their pictures taken with him and all. He was wonderful. Then he started doing funny things, troublesome things. He started getting out of line on the oil quotas. He wanted a bigger quota of the market. Contrary to what was told to the American public, that he would take away your gasoline and your fuel, it's just the opposite. They wanted to be able to get into that market. And he did certain other things. He did not privatize the country. It was, in fact, he kept it state-owned. As Rumsfeld said, it looks like a Stalinist economy. I thought that was an amusing set of words. And so suddenly he was now a demon. And that's when they went in and they got after him. That was the crucial difference. Are you on this side of the Great Divide or that side? Are you going to work for the world order or are you going to not? The empire, I'm going to finish up right here. I'm sorry, I've been talking too long. It's hot as hell in here too, isn't it? Let's open that door. The empire sees only two types of states beyond its borders. Either you're a satellite, a vassal state, also called a client state, the one that says, come on in, boys, it's all yours, whatever you want, take it. Just give my brother Jose and me, or my brother Abdul and me a little payoff here, and we'll take care of it. If they get out of line, we'll crack their heads, and it's all yours. That's the vassal state. Or you follow, or you could be an ally. An ally is a more sophisticated relationship, but it's essentially the same, where we follow the same path as you, because we have the same plutocracy, and we're with you in tune. The other kind of state that the empire sees is enemy, or potential enemy. Either you are in this world order, or if you're not, you are potentially a cause of trouble, and we will go after you. As I said, the empire feeds off the republic. It's a rich global military power. There are those people who say the empire is in decline. There's a whole literature coming out now about twilight of empire and the like. But I don't really see that yet at all. I mean, the military budgets are as big and powerful as ever. They now have opened a massive base in Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan, a place they never dreamed they would have it. In Kosovo, a huge one. And they'll have the green zone in Iraq even after the troops come home. So the empire is as strong as ever. Now, it is true that what people see is the republic in decline. They see all sorts of things declining here, and they think that that's what the problem, that's the empire. But and it also is true that ultimately an empire, like any parasite, can kill its host by draining and sucking from it. Well, the alternative, I say, what I think the alternative is to capitalism is socialism. I support socialism. And I don't mean these two big isms in this big global momentous clash that they're supposed to be in. I mean, can somebody lower the heat? Anybody can find it? What? Aren't you all feeling it too? Or is it just me putting you to sleep? I come from California. This is pretty cold weather, let me tell you. No, it's okay. I respond best to a slow rhythmic clapping. Go ahead. Rather than thinking of these two great isms where one is clashed and is in retreat and the other is now taking everything over, look at the reality of things. I support socialism because in some areas it works so much better than capitalism. You don't have people there siphoning it off. Imagine building a medical system whose ultimate function is profit, private profit. Not delivering help and saving lives, but private profit is its ultimate. That begins to create problems. So I say socialism works because healthcare in Finland, in France, in Norway, Sweden is much, much better than it is here. It's a rotten. It's a crime what it is here. I believe education is better. Better here. You know, when I taught at State University of New York, years before I came to Vermont, UVM, I remember students saying, socialism, how could it even work? I mean, I can't even imagine it. And I said, well, you're sitting in it right now, you know. I mean, here was a publicly run institution, and it was, and the quality of teaching and scholarship and research and students and such was certainly as good as and better than most of the private schools on Long Island in those days. It was very good, and instead of you having to pay whatever it was, $10,000, you only had to pay something like, I think it was $300 a semester as a registration fee. Of course, what they're doing, what's happening in this country is the other way. There's a gradual privatization of higher education by simply raising tuition fees. So in effect, these become public schools that are run like private schools. Utilities. The utilities in this country that are publicly owned have lower rates than the private utilities. And not only that, but the earnings go right back into the budget. They don't go into some rich stockholders' pockets and the like. They're not siphoning off, you see. Why when you put a light on, should somebody be making a profit off that? Transportation, environmental care, banking, the one state in the Union, the one of maybe 2 or 3 in the whole Union that did not suffer terrible financial crises in those recent years was North Dakota. It's the only state with a state-owned bank. There's a book on this too. Somebody wrote recently, and of course I forget the author and title, but and that's because the wealth of the state is deposited in their own banks. It's not given over to these bankers. You know what the bankers do. I'll end. Speaking of bankers, I'll end on that. I'll end by quoting Giulio Tremonti. You know who Giulio Tremonti is? Giulio Tremonti is the besieged finance minister of Italy, and he once said he's in the Berlusconi right-wing fascist government, and Berlusconi says about him, he says, he's a socialist, but I know him so long, that's why I don't fire him. But Tremonti says, salvate il popolo, non le banche. Save the people, not the banks. And that's what we got to do. Save the people, not the banks. What? Sure. I talked too long, though. That one too long? Yeah? No? Okay, no, it wasn't too long. Okay.
So before people take off, just a reminder of Michael's book. There's a bunch of them over there that we'd love to have you take home. Here's the commercial. If there are any people who have any quick announcements about some political events that they want to share right now, we could do that first, and then Michael's willing to do a few questions and answers. So, announcements first. Alex?
Thank you. I understood somebody spoke in the beginning about the crackdown down at Burlington that was going on this evening. The cops came down in the dozens with giant tear gas canister launchers, with tasers in hand, with paintball guns. It's quite clear that the movement of the 99% to reject the 1%'s wars, empire, and spending of social money is actually threatening to them. I can rant forever. I simply want to announce that there was a tactical retreat back to the Unitarian Church tonight, which was opened up for the occupiers. And there's a General Assembly tonight at 9 to discuss retaking the park, just as the police crackdown in Oakland led to a retreat, mass mobilization, and a retaking of the park. And it's absolutely going to take this sort of grassroots movement and fight back, just like what we saw in the rejection of the Vietnam War, that's going to change the system of the 1% and its empire.
Are they destroying the pup tents and cleaning it, just wiping them out and all that? Or are they leaving them alone for now?
The mayor was in quite the predicament. We actually forced him to demand the release of one person that the police had taken, and we ultimately did get him to swear not to actually bring down the tents. But this is the same man that invited the occupiers into City Hall to discuss the situation after the incident earlier today. And it was while we were in that meeting that the dozens and dozens of, I think, 30, 40 police, that's when they took the camp. So it's really unclear. The mayor said one thing, but he said many things. So it's unclear. But right now, it looks like that's not the case.
So Oren, and then Dave.
Yeah, just real quickly, I think, everything the man said is totally true. In other cities, when things like this happen, people come down in solidarity and help out. So at 9 o'clock or whatever, more people that could come down and help in solidarity and stand with the people from occupied Burlington, will be less chance to have police violence, which occurs when the police move in.
And it's actually planning the action for taking back the park tomorrow. So stay plugged in to hear what's going to be going on tomorrow. And I'll certainly.
Park or the Unitarian Church?
The General Assembly is at the church tonight at 9 to plan the retaking of the park tomorrow. And that will be announced through all the listservs, through everything, and I'll certainly announce it on the Will Miller Social Justice Lecture Series.
What church?
The Unitarian Church is at the top of Church Street.
And the more people, the more support there is then, I think, and that registers on that. I don't think that the powers that be are not interested in what you have to say or what you think. That's the only thing they're interested in about you, is what you're thinking. They don't care what you eat. They don't care if you live or die. They don't care if you're overstressed or underpaid. They don't care about any of that. But they do care about what you're thinking, what's on your mind. Every day they worry about it. They check all the opinion polls all the time. They support half of the things they ever utter is to manipulate your thought, is to get you to be thinking the way they want you to think. So much of the fight is an ideological fight. I mean, we are so ideologically underdeveloped on the left. But the right-wingers understand that to control people, you've got to control their minds. To control their minds, you've got to give them labels and images and narratives and ideologies and thoughts and that sort of thing. Now, we don't want to control your mind. I believe it's not ideology, it's an analysis of what's really happening. Why do the police act this way? Why? Why do they act this way in almost every city around? What is it that they are protecting? What is it that they are fighting back or beating back? This is, when you start thinking and asking these kind of questions, that to me was what was so marvelous about the Occupy movement is many of the signs had an ideological dimension, which you rarely see in U.S. protests. You see, end the war, stop the this, do the that. But here you'd have them saying capitalism is this, socialism would be that, or the one I saw right down at Occupy Burlington, just a little cardboard sign outside somebody's pup tent. He said, soon the people will have nothing left to eat but the rich. I mean, that's brilliant. You can't make up that stuff. You can't get a two-man committee together to think up all those things. That's the democracy in the streets realizing itself. I have an article out on my blog called Occupy America. I finished it a couple of hours before I raced off to catch the plane to come out this way. So if you get a chance, go take a look at that. Okay. Should we have questions now?
Well, yes, Jay.
Empires may be very strong and last for a long time, but they all do eventually fall. When I think about the arrogance of empire, I think of Shelley's poem, Ozymandias. About how that empire...
My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings.
Yes. How do you see this empire falling? It's not going to last
Well, Jay, there's one other variable now, though. If this empire might fall and take us all down with it, I mean, if it lasts too long, it could be too costly, and we're having a terrible time. What's at stake now is not just social justice, but the environment itself. So, and it could take a long time. The British Empire lasted 150 years. The Roman Empire lasted centuries. So I don't know. I wish you were right that the empire is in decline. But of course, if the republic is in such serious decline, that's got to affect the empire eventually. I mean, the empire has certain weak points. One is recruitment of personnel. That's why Obama is so in love with his drones. The drones, they love them. And this is the weapon they've been dreaming of. No loss of life. It can go around, be controlled automatically, and you can shoot down and kill everybody in the village and move on to the next one without a single soldier being lost. Because heavy loss of life becomes politically costly. Not because they're concerned about the lives of those soldiers. They're not concerned about those lives, as witnessed by what happens to them when they come home. They're not concerned about that. They're concerned about the political spin-off or effect of high casualty rates. It's going to limit our hand as far as destroying this country or that social movement and such. So that might be a weak point, that if we can get at recruitment, and for a while it was true, they were having a terrible time filling their recruitment quotas, but now with the recession, they're getting a lot of kids, especially from inner city or small towns, who don't have nothing, zero out of high school and such, and the Army thing looks like a good deal. It looks like a chance to be able to pay for their education with the GI Bill. And it's not true. The GI Bill today is not what it was in 1946. I could tell you that. Many of the vets come back and they end up going. This is how the empire cares about its foot soldiers. They end up having to take out loans. They end up having to take jobs, two jobs or something, to try to go through school. Many of them give up. They said it's just too hard. It's just too impossible. So so that's one place. If we could get people, that was happening with the Vietnam War. There were whole platoons and even companies, a few instances of at company level, but platoons would go down the road, and instead of making contact with the enemies, they go sit down and toke up. They were fighting the war that way, which is a much more pleasant way to fight the war. And I remember the 101st Airborne Division troops on the bridge to crossing the Arlington Bridge, where the veterans against the war, the Vietnam veterans against the war, came marching, and there was the 101st Airborne Division paratroopers. This is the elite crack unit, 82nd Airborne and 101st, and they refused to arrest them. They were ordered to arrest them. They said, "We're not going to arrest and rough up, American veterans and all that." And Nixon it was like, the Tsar, the Imperial Guard is not doing what I told them to do, and this looks like they're the only thing between me and the pitchforks, but so we just have to struggle on all fronts. That's one plan. I have another plan for this whole thing, but that involves guillotines, and I'm not going to talk about it. Good night. Good night, thanks. And I want to say it's so great to be back in Vermont and see all the people in motion.